We do our worship first and then Bible class next, so you don't have to run through Bible class. So put your seatbelts on. We have some material maybe to cover. For those of you who were unable to join us or be with us, we've been doing a discussion on relationships. We did one session on Friday, 3 sessions on Saturday, and we're going to kind of wrap things up today. This will seem more seminarish this morning, and then in worship, we'll do a little expository work from the book of 1 Corinthians. When I was 21, I think, I lived in Alexander City, Alabama. I was walking through the halls of a conference center. A big bunch of kids were there. James Cullens walked by me and said, "Hey, one summer we'd like you to come and spend a couple of weeks working with our young people." I said, "I'd like to do that, Brother Cullens." He had held a meeting at the first place I was ever a youth minister. In March of that year, I got a phone call. Brother Cullens said, "Hey, remember you promised to come stay with us in Alexander City this summer." That's not the way I remembered that conversation. But I ended up in Alexander City and lived in their fellowship hall. It was a detached thing, and I was there. Jackie and I were not yet engaged, but I knew that if I ever went to Arkansas, I would not leave again without her. So I was living in Alexander City, Alabama, and she was in Velvet Ridge, Arkansas, and I preached at this little church because Brother Cullens had surgery that summer and got sick, and so I ended up as the youth minister doing Sunday morning, Sunday night, youth Bible class, 2 radio programs, and working with the youth, and kind of got baptized by fire. While I was there, my brother sent me a cassette tape. If you're under the age of 40, that's a little piece of plastic, has a little black ribbon in it, and you stick a pencil in it and you roll it up. And it was a cassette tape on relationships. And I sat down with that little tape and a little earbud and listened to it and took notes on it with a typewriter. If you're under the age of 40, it's a typewriter. All right? And I still have those notes. The material is not original with me, but I remember writing in the top of that typed little page, "You need to understand this before you ask Jackie to marry you." So this has been some pretty significant material, and it's I call it the foundational attitudes or the building blocks of relationships. And so we'll just kind of start with those. There's no real good introduction other than just to jump in. When Jesus talks in the Sermon on the Mount, if you look at Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and we do ourselves an injustice when we separate biblical chapters. The Bible wasn't written in chapters and verses. It was written, Matthew was a long letter. And so sometimes we miss the idea that these are connected thoughts. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is one self-contained discussion from Jesus. And I believe it to be an absolute discussion of internals versus externals. Attitudes are more important than actions. When we worship together, we'll eventually get to the attitude of love. That Paul will say, it really doesn't matter what you do. If you do it and it's not because of love, it really doesn't matter. And so as we talk about basically some attitudes for relationships, and as we talked about on Friday and Saturday, the only thing you really control in a relationship is yourself. I'm in charge of me. I can't control you. And so here are the things that if we could adopt or adapt to these attitudes, it would probably improve not just our marriages, but all other relationships. And so attitude statement number 1, we need to be able to admit and embrace the fact that sometimes we're wrong. We talked yesterday about the Southern philosopher Pogo. We has found the enemy, and they is us. Sometimes we get so worried about having an excuse for what somebody else has given us a reason to do whatever we do. Sometimes you look at your behavior, you compare it to a standard of behavior. This is how Christ says to behave. This is how I behave, and it doesn't match. And I think sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is take ownership of our faults. My wife is a coach. She has coached middle school, high school, and in the Junior Olympic Developmental Program. And she says an athlete who will not admit their mistakes is an athlete you can't do anything with. Because if you say, "Hey, why? This is our plan. Why? Yeah, coach, but or this is not the way I was trained." If you can't admit when you're wrong, You can't fix anything in a relationship. Now, if you're not comfortable, I'm okay with that. But if you are comfortable, I think it's very therapeutic for us to practice that statement. So I'm going to count to 3, and if you're comfortable, just simply say the words with me, I was wrong. You'll notice nobody will have a heart attack. Lightning won't strike anybody. Keep your elbows out of the ribs of your spouse, by the way. All right? So on 3, I was wrong. 1, 2, 3, I was wrong. Now, it's not just enough to be wrong, but understanding that you're wrong, then comes, I'm sorry. Now, this is not, I'm sorry I got caught. This is not, I'm sorry I'm going to face consequences. This is an absolute understanding that what I've done, what I've said, what I've failed to do, what I've failed to say has an effect on the integrity of us. It's affected me and God, or it's affected me and you. Godly sorrow, and that's what we're talking about, godly sorrow works repentance that leads to salvation, not to be regretted. I've done some things I should not have done and was not always penitent of those things. As a youth minister, and I hadn't been an active youth minister a number of years, I do mostly training of youth ministers, but as a youth minister, especially in Alabama, the children will show their love for you by coming to your house and decorating your yard with toilet tissue. I don't know what you call it here. We call it rolling the yard, okay? I got tired of cleaning my yard up. I live in a cul-de-sac, basically a fatal funnel. One way in, one way out. I put a motion detector on the side of my house. I took the bulbs out of it, split an extension cord, hot wired it to the bulb receptors, ran it under my house, drilled a hole in my floor, and brought the cord up and attached it to a radio. If you violate my perimeter, my radio comes on under my bed. I have a ninja suit and a .357 Magnum. And I like to hunt teenagers. They're smart. They're more fun to hunt than deer. Deer are smarter. Late one night, I was laying in the bed and my radio went off. I got up, put the ninja suit on. Looked out the window, 3 boys decorating my yard. Snuck out the back door, went around the wood line, came around and blocked them off from their avenue of escape. Snuck up to Bubba McDonald. His name is Charles McDonald. He's the youngest person to ever join the Hoover, Alabama Police Department as a SWAT team member. Snuck up behind him and just backed the hammer on that Magnum. It was loaded with blanks. But if you've ever looked down the barrel of a .357 Magnum in the moonlight, it looks like a well. It looked like you could fall forever. He threw his hands in the air and his mouth said, "It's Bubba, don't shoot me, it's Bubba, don't shoot me," but nothing came out. He was just kind of vibrating there. I asked him to lay down. He did. I put a cold gravel on the back of his neck. Said, "Do you feel that barrel in the back of your neck, son?" I said, "Don't move," and I eased away. Kevin Hall was wrapping my deck in toilet tissue. He's a programmer. Wife Dana, they have 2 beautiful children. They still live in the city of Huntsville. I fired that Magnum twice. I had to loan Kevin some sweatpants to go home with that night. Underneath my house, hiding in his hooded sweater, is the Dean of Student Activities for Freed-Hardeman University, Tony Allen. He was not the dean at Freed-Hardeman at the time. I'd like to think maybe I corrected some of that behavior, and now he's the Dean of Student Activities. He was just hiding under my house praying for daylight. I understand that what I did that night to those boys was wrong. Number one, I'm in Alabama. I'm running around in a ninja suit with a pistol in the dark. Somebody in my neighborhood probably could kill me. Number two, waving that pistol around, whether it was loaded, unloaded, had blanks or no blanks, was reckless endangerment. And what I did with those boys that night was wrong. I ain't been sorry yet. Okay? That's not what we're talking about. When you understand that your behavior is inappropriate, whether you had the right to do something or not doesn't always make it right. David hides in the cave of Adullam. Saul comes into the cave, puts himself in a compromising position. One of David's men whispers in his ear, "The Lord has delivered your enemy into your hands." Does David have a right to kill Saul? Saul's thrown a spear at him twice. You get one shot with me, by the way. David's conflict resolution style involves killing people. Saul has slain his thousands. David has slain 10,000. When Absalom raids the castle and is trying to make a run for being a king, as David leaves, A guy is on the other side of the Kishon Valley, and he's throwing rocks at David, and David's number one man says, hey, would you like me to bring you his head? Now, there's a lot of things you can do when a guy's throwing rocks at you. Bringing you his head is probably not in my top 100. These were violent, hard men. And David's in the cave with a guy who's tried to murder him twice. And he's got the right to kill him. But guess what David says? I will not lay my hand against the Lord's anointed. And he doesn't. Just because you have the right to do something doesn't make it right. So not only do we get to say I'm wrong, but we have to admit what we've done affected me and God, and what we've done affected me and you. So we have to be able to say, I'm sorry as well. So we're going to repeat, I'm sorry on 3, get the therapeutic benefits from that. 1, 2, 3, I'm sorry. The next attitude that we need to have is the attitude of let's do what's best for you. Now, this is not giving in. This is not giving up. This is just giving. This is being a peacemaker. The difference in a peacemaker and a peace lover is a peace lover loves peace. A peacemaker is willing to initiate the action to cause peace. We talked yesterday about Abraham and Lot. That you've got this conflict between these two powerful herdsmen, and Abraham can settle this by using his private army. He can say, I'm going to graze here and you can't. But instead of that, he initiates the repair attempt by asking Lot, what do you need? If you graze here, I'll graze there. If you graze there, I'll graze here. Basically, it's understanding that I'm going to put your needs above my rights. And by the way, meekness is not weakness. And a lot of times we consider meekness to be, and meekness is not weakness. I'm not much of an equestrian, but I've ridden some horses, and I've ridden some well-trained horses. I was speaking in Cloverdale, Indiana, way back in the day, and a girl there was training cutting horses. These are the horses that will cut a little calf out of a herd and chase it down, and then when you rope it, it'll lay back on its heels and trap that calf. Those horses can do a fence corner. They run into a corner of a fence, drop down, and make a spin. And if you're not holding on when they do that, that's an interesting ride too. But when you get on a horse that's neck reined, you're sitting on that saddle, and you take that rein and you lay it here, he'll turn here. You lay it here, he'll turn here. You do understand that when a horse lets you ride him, he is being meek. He is allowing you to control his power. Even with a bit in his mouth, a horse that decides, you know what, I'll take this little pinch, but you're not going to ride, he can ride you into a hedge bush. He can ride you under low-hanging limbs. He can scrub you off on a rock wall. If you think you're stronger than a horse, go grab one in a headlock. See how that works out for you, all right? When you're riding a horse, the horse is not weak. The horse says, I'm letting you be in charge of my strength, and I'll do what you ask me to do. So I want to do what's best for you. Sometimes involves, I've got a right to say no to this, I've got a right to do this or a right to do that, but I want to know what works for you. I want to know what helps us have peace. Turning the other cheek, going the second mile, praying for your enemies, blessing those who curse you, giving food and water to your enemy. All that lines us up as being children of God. So I want to do what's best for you on 3. 1, 2, 3. I want to do what's best for you. Number 4, I want to do what's right regardless. I don't get to evaluate fun. I don't get to evaluate convenient. I really don't get to evaluate consequences. This is a place where I have a standard in my life, and the standard in my life is this is Christ-like behavior. And I'm going to raise the expectation in my family that the norm is Christ-like behavior. And so sometimes we start looking at making decisions, and those decisions boil down to a question of right and wrong, and I'm always going to choose what's right. I'm going to do what's right regardless. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, confronted with the idea of bowing down and worshiping a pagan idol. And they told the king in no uncertain terms, you have the physical power to throw us in a furnace. God has the power to save us, but regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the consequences, regardless of the outcomes, If we burn, but bound to that idol, not going to happen. I'm going to do what's right regardless is that we have a standard of right and wrong that we don't violate, and it may cost us a job. It may cost us money. It may cost us a friendship. It may cost us a position. It may become very, very inconvenient, but we live and die by our ethical principles. And by the way, just to make sure, the things that we do and the things that we don't do not connect us to Christ. Our connection to Christ dictates our ethics. And if we ever get that in reverse, we're living like Pharisees. We're living like the old law. I do what I do right and wrong because of my connection to Christ, not these actions connect me to Christ. I want to do what's right regardless. On 3. 1, 2, 3. I want to do what's right regardless. Sometimes I get into a situation and somebody has to apologize to me. Sometimes, and it's rare, somebody comes up and says, "Hey, Lonnie, I'm wrong and I'm sorry." Well, when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm wrong and I'm sorry," the next attitude we have is an I statement that simply says, "I forgive you." Because when somebody else asks us for forgiveness, or they ask us for mercy, or they ask us for grace, and we forgive them, it accomplishes two things. Number one, it gives me control of my life back. If Tim makes me mad, quote unquote, makes me mad, and I go, "Well, I can't be happy till Tim is as mad as I am." Who controls my future? I can't move forward until he's hurt as bad as I've been hurt. Who controls my future? Hey, when I write that thing off and go, "Tim, you did what you did, but I got past it," all of a sudden I have control back in my life. His reaction, his response, the things that he does doesn't dictate my life anymore. And so forgiving somebody, first of all, allows you to balance your books. The second thing forgiveness does is it allows me to do on a microcosm level for somebody else what God's already done for me. And the macro level. I'm doing for you what God's already done for me. I'm giving you what you need, not what you deserve. So sometimes I need to learn to forgive people. And I'm not in the camp that says unless a person repents and asks you, you don't have to forgive them. I believe you forgive people as a natural asset of your being a person. That there's no unfinished business between us. Owe no man anything but to love. So we're going to say, "I forgive you" in practice on 3. 1, 2, 3. I forgive you. This next one is sometimes a little hard to understand, but it's pretty simple. It's "I love you." Period. Now the period is about the size of a silver dollar, and there's 3 coats of black paint on it. It's not "I love you if." It's not "I love you when." It's not "I love you because." It is pure, unadulterated, without consequence or preamble. I'm choosing to love you as a gift. It's an attitude that I adopt simply because you need to be loved. I mentioned earlier in the week that my wife has a little dog named Oreo. Oreo is a little Spanish water dog. She's black and white. And the cool thing about having a dog at your house is they love you. She doesn't know what I do for a living. She doesn't know who I am. She'd never listened to my podcast. She'd never read a book I've written. She doesn't know if I make $1 million, if I don't make any money. But when you walk into that house, guess what you get hit with? Double barrels of love. You leave her in the house and go to the mailbox and come back, she acts like you've been to the moon. "He's back!" and just runs around. Jackie doesn't run. She's had 2 ACL replacements and 2 artificial hips. The first artificial hip was necessary. The second artificial hip we did because she was walking in a circle. That's not true. But anyway, so we go for a walk, and she takes Oreo, and I go for a run. I run my 3 miles. I turn around, come back, and as I start coming back, you can see Oreo's posture. She notices my little wobbly gait, and she gets alert, and Jackie pops that leash, and it's like she's been shot out of a cannon. I've been gone 20 minutes. And she runs unadulterated. This is not "I love you for what you can do for me." This is not "I love you with some hidden agenda." This is not "I love you because you're popular or you have assets, you have resources." This is "I love you and you're powerless to do anything for me." The definition we've used all weekend is love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another person. It doesn't require or consider reciprocity, and you don't have to deserve it. That's what this is. This is, I love you, period. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. When we were powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will somebody dare for a good man. Occasionally someone might die for a good man. But while we were enemies, Christ died for us. That's how we love people. And we don't bring people to church because they make a good elder or they make a good deacon. We don't bring people into church because we need something from them. We bring people into the church because they need Jesus. In that pure, unadulterated love. I love you, period. So let's do that. 1, 2, 3. I love you, period. Now this next one often gets confused with the third one, but it's I want to be the first to do something positive. I want to be the first to do something positive. It's like I want to do what's best for you, but it really takes that initiating good to a brand new level. It's the idea that I'm going to go out of my way to make sure there's no unfinished business between us. Jesus says if you come in and you bring your gift to the altar. Okay, I'm going to turn that into Southern English. You're coming to church. All right, you bring your gift to the altar and you remember your brother has something against you. Now notice, it doesn't say your brother has a valid cause. It doesn't say your brother has a clue. It doesn't say your brother is right. It doesn't say your brother's problem is legitimate. You're coming to worship God and you say, you know what, there's unfinished business with me and my brother. What do? You leave your gift at the altar and you go see your brother. I don't know about your experience. My experience in a Brother's Keeper program, the door knocking, where you're not door knocking people who aren't in church, but you're door knocking people who are in church but they miss. You ever been on some of those? I've done some of those, and I've served warrants with a SWAT team. They're very similar to me. Let me see your hands. Where were you wasting not? Get it on the table. You know, wow. I wonder what would happen if we went to those houses of people who were missing from our assembly and we knocked on the door and they came to the door and said, hey, brother, I missed you at worship. It's not beyond possibility that something I've said or something I've done has affected your desire to assemble with the saints. Would you pray with me on the porch? I don't even have to come in. Would you pray with me and ask God to forgive me for anything I've done that's offended you? You know how many of those people come to church the next time? You know how many of those people show up the next time there's worship? What you've done, you've initiated good. I want to be the first to do something positive. I've initiated the repair attempt, and that's how you solve problems in relationships. You don't wait for the other person to tell you. You don't wait to hear it from somebody else. You go, I don't think things are right here, and I'm going to approach you and not talk about your problem, but I'm going to say, hey, there may be something that I've done I'm unaware of. Let's fix it. I want to be the first to do something positive. 1, 2, 3. I want to be the first to do something positive. And then the last one is, sometimes we call it God bless the Rolaids, or I will absorb. A Rolaids will absorb 64% its own weight in acid. Some days, an imperfect person interacts with an imperfect person, and one of us is more imperfect than the other, and you're having a bad day. Guess what I get to do with you when you're imperfect? Absorb it. Guess what I get to do when you're hard to get along with and when you're unlovable? Absorb it. Guess what I get to do when you're selfish and cantankerous and immature? Absorb it. Understanding, we have grandchildren. And when you have grandchildren who are 4 and 5, you know how they act? 4 and 5-year-olds. They're egocentric and they're selfish. And you want to say, what's wrong with you? When you go, you know what? There's nothing wrong with them. They're 4 and 5. Now, that doesn't mean you don't require some behavior. That doesn't mean you don't have some consequences. But for the most part, there's a difference when a child acts like a child and a child acts defiant. When a child acts like a child, I give him some grace. When a child's defiant, you have discipline. But you only use discipline for defiance, not when it's... How do immature people act? How do immature Christians act? How do scared people act? How do insecure people act? Oh, there's a situation here and a person's behavior is fitting for what they're experiencing. Why should I be personally offended when a child acts like a child? Or an insecure person acts insecure, or a scared person acts scared, or an unsophisticated person acts unsophisticated. I'm just going to absorb that. George Foreman, before he sold grills, was a world champion boxer. And in an interview, they asked him, so what's the difference in a world champion and everybody else? Do you hit harder? Do you hit faster? Mr. Foreman said the difference in the world champion and everybody else is the world champion will get up one more time. That's what championship relationships are about. Toughness, gentlemen, has nothing to do with how much you can dish out. Toughness is about how much you can take. And when we decide that we're going to be people of endurance in our relationships, when I've made a decision, I'm in this for life. When I've made a decision that says, I've chosen to love you, I'm going to love you on your good days, I'm going to love you on your bad days. By the way, what do those marriage vows say? Better, worse, rich, poor, sickness, health, good times, bad times, what? That's not a mantra, that's a promise. And the only way to keep that promise is to have the attitude that says, I will not quit. I will absorb on 3. 1, 2, 3. I will absorb. Now, we started talking this morning about attitudes and the foundational attitudes, and I told you that this material was not original with me. I like to give credit where credit's due. If I quote you on my podcast or I quote you in my book, I try to make a reference. I'd like to tune you in to the original version of this lesson. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. And seeing the multitudes, he went into a mountain. When he was seated, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit. I was wrong. Recognizing we are spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are those who mourn. I'm sorry. Blessed are the meek. I want to do what's best for you. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I want to do what's right regardless. Blessed are the merciful. I forgive you. Blessed are the pure in heart. I love you, period. Blessed are the peacemakers. I want to be the first to do something positive. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. I will absorb. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus introduced the concept of what it is to serve God, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, these are the internal attitudes that you have to have in order to please the Father. He goes on to say that if this is what we do, if this is how we interact, something happens to us. We become salt and we become light. And when people look at our salt and they see our light, something really transformative happens. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do the men light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. Let your light so shine before men that when they see your good works, they will glorify your Father in heaven. If I can treat people, the people I'm married to, the people I work with, the people I live around, the people I congregate with those attitudinal principles, and I can live in my community this way, then the people in our community will look at us. And it's not that Christians are immune from struggle. It's not that Christians are immune from problems. In fact, when Jesus closes out the Sermon on the Mount, he uses a set of verses we sing as a children's song. The wise man built his house upon the rock.